Hi Tamora, I'm Lene. I'd like to interview you to Pelleskærbrud and E-regionen, which are Danish digital libraries for children and grown-ups.
Okay.
Yes. When did you decide to become a writer?
My father had suggested that I try to write a book, and once I got into really writing it, I decided that there was really no other life for me. And I toyed with being also a lawyer and the next female president of the United States. And then when I was in 10th grade in high school, I don't know how that translates over here, I stopped being able to write original fiction. I was able to write very bad poetry, school reports, obviously. I wrote for the school newsletter, but I wasn't able to write original fiction until summer before my third year in university, when the dam broke and I wrote my first original short story in years. And my plan to become a psychologist specializing in working with teenagers, which is what I went to university for, went by the way, and all I could think of was writing and finding any kind of job that would support me while I wrote.
Yes. How did you get the idea to your first book?
My first book, well, there was one book before the book I usually acknowledge as my first book. My mentor in my last year of university, my writing mentor, suggested that I write a novel, and I actually laughed in his face, because up until a year before that, he couldn't know until I told him I had not been able to write at all. In fact, this was a short fiction course, which is all I felt I could do, but he said he felt I should be working on a novel. And I laughed, but I went home, and he wanted me to write about my childhood and my growing up, because it was very traumatic. And I tried, but the problem with writing about my own life was that it might be dramatic for other people to hear about, but it was kind of boring to me because I'd already done it. So 5 pages later, I thought I was drying up again and wouldn't be able to write, and I started thinking, I used to write reams and reams of paper, and what was I writing all those stories about? And I remembered it was a girl sword slinger. So I wrote this theme that I'd written often as a young teenager, which was this girl who enters a contest to become prime minister to a king. I didn't know much about government then. And it could be kind of grueling, but 6 months later I had a 110-page manuscript. The only good thing about it, even beyond my own opinions and being my own worst critic, which writers need to keep them working harder, is that it was a finished book. And 5 months later, I had a dream, and I woke up, and by the time I got to the typewriter, I had forgotten all of the dream, but an image, and the image never even made it into the book, but there was something in it that unlocked something in my brain, and I wrote a scene with a pair of twins confronting their father, who was telling them how they were going to live the next few years, and then the next scene in which they figure out how they're going to get around it, and the next scene after that. And I call it my String of Pearls novel because I just wrote scene after scene after scene. And by the time I finished, which was, again, 5 months later, I had finished a 752-page novel, adult novel, called The Song of the Lioness. And that was what became my first 4 novels for teenagers.
Do you write one book at a time, or do you write more books at the same time?
I tried writing 2 books. There was a period where I was writing 1 book for Random House and 1 book for Scholastic. And I thought, why don't I work on 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon? And I just couldn't make it work. I have to be entirely inside 1 book and stay inside until I finish it. And then my brain is freed up to work on the next one.
What is it about fantasy you like?
There are a lot of things I like about fantasy. For one, you can talk about really serious issues if you disguise them so people can think about them at a distance. You can talk about poverty, you can talk about law, you can talk about the law of might over right, which it was a big issue in the medieval period and is even more of an issue now. You can talk about the differences between men and women, and is that not too limiting a division between the sexes? What happens to the people who don't neatly fit into those divisions? So all of those things you can talk about, and there are no limits really to fantasy except there has to be magic in it. Fantasy can take place in the modern world, it can take place in a medieval world. I like a medieval world. There's a book by a man named William Manchester called Lit Only by Fire. The medieval world was a world where the only light you had was supplied by fire, and I like that description of what I do, because in that environment your shadows are so very dark and what's lit is so very bright. The contrasts are clearer, so you can highlight them better. And I like the magic, of course. But again, it helps me make my point better. And also, fantasy is the only genre that speaks about issues that people don't speak about today. It speaks about honor. Nobody wants to talk about honor today. They speak about, oh, you've got to do what's right. You got to do what you think is necessary. They won't say honor. They try to laugh at people who say that's not honorable. You're not acting with honor. Fantasy is the only genre where you can talk about honor again and nobody laughs. In fact, they believe because they want to believe and because they yearn to believe that people really need a standard of behavior, a strict standard of behavior that calls upon them not only to do what's right for them, but what's right for the people around them. And fantasy will talk about that. Fantasy talks about justice, not in, the court system type justice, although there are trials in fantasy and they get you to think that way, but justice between people, justice given by a ruler to their people, or the absence of justice and how that leads to the ruin of society. Fantasy is an idealistic literature, and this world, our time, needs idealism very badly.
most of your books have very strong female characters. Why is that?
When I was growing up, I was on the leading edge of the second wave of feminism. So I saw a lot of where 50s womanhood left us. My cousins were beaten by their father, and they married men who beat them in return. I knew women who depended on men to support them and were at a loss when those men left them. I know women who expected to do nothing with their lives because that was what they had been taught women should expect. And they were so frustrated in a way. And I also knew women who had broken that mold. I knew a Quaker woman who had become an attorney. I knew Pendergast. I think she was a Norwegian woman who had broken into the theater and the arts. I had an English teacher who was absolutely fearless. You looked at those women, and then you looked at my beautiful, sweet 5th grade teacher who was broken by the scorn of male teachers, driven to tears. And what we really needed, what I really desired, was women who could stand on their own without asking for help, without wanting help, being the help that other people turn to. So, and also, I started because I was reading all these adventure books, all these books where boys and men went into the jungle and climbed Mount Everest and sailed the world on a balsa wood raft and fought battles in the arena. And where were the girls? What if girls wanted to have adventures too? There was a book series that came out when I was young that had a princess who came along for the journey and was part of the adventure in that she had a little bit of magic available to her, and the rest of the time she talked a lot and insulted the boy hero and stamped her foot when she was angry, and I was told that that was a character to emulate. And I thought, this is a bunch of hooey. This isn't a hero. This isn't someone I want to emulate. The girls I wanted to emulate were in historical fiction, and they did great. There were 3 of them. They did great things, but at the ends of their books, they settled down to get married and confine themselves to the house. And I didn't want that. That didn't interest me one little bit. I wanted to read about girls who could hold their own with boys, and women who could hold their own with men, and people didn't make a big deal out of it.
You have 2 main universes, Torsil and the Circle. Do you sometimes have trouble keeping them apart?
I'm having a little trouble with that right now because my editor wants me to take a different track in the Tortal universe than the one I had planned out for the next 3 or 4 books. And every idea I keep trying to come up with as an alternate smells a little too much like the Circle universe. But up till now, no, I did, because the Circle universe is, the magic is different, the religions are different, the magic is or the gods are barely there. We don't see them at all. We catch glimpses of them in battle magic, but that's not going to carry over. That's just because they're closer to the gods where battle magic takes place.
Your total books stretch over several years, with new characters taking the main lead in each new series. Is it difficult to relegate former main characters to a smaller role?
No, because they're adults and they have their own lives to live beyond where I'm focusing on a new young hero. I know what they're doing, I know how they're doing it, but I'm working with someone else now. It would be like if your kids went off to college and then got married and lived somewhere else, and you got foster kids and you were occupied in helping them to straighten their lives out and get an education, learn to live a good life, and you suddenly decided to, oh, what the heck, hop on over and visit your kids where they live. You can't do that. You have to concentrate on the kids who are with you now.
Do your characters live in your house with you, or do they only exist in your books?
No, my characters pretty much live in the house. My husband knows that they're around there somewhere, and I'm going to be talking about them wherever we are in the house, or I'm going to come find him with a problem. If I sit there staring into space, that's what I'm doing. I'm plotting. It'd be nice if they can find themselves, but then I might start treating them more like paper than people.
Many books are being filmed these days. Would you like to have some of your books filmed?
Oh, I hate this question. If I were given a decent money offer that didn't insult my intelligence, like the last two offers, I would take it because I can use the money, but I would remind the fans that what they see on the screen and what they see on their heads in the books are going to be two totally different things, even if the director loves the books and gets them. I mean, the director of the Fellowship of the Ring loved the books and did his best to follow the books, but he still had to cut big chunks out of it to get something that wasn't 48 hours long. And then there's Hayao Miyazaki, who loved Howl's Moving Castle, and Diana Wynne Jones was very happy with the end result of his making Howl's Moving Castle, but it has very little to do, the movie has very little to do with the book Howl's Moving Castle, except it's got a roving house, not a castle, it's shaped like a boat, and it's got a flame named Calcifer. But it doesn't have the same plot. Even if somebody loves your work, they don't necessarily do it the same. And then you have books like Aragon and movies like Aragon and The Dark is Rising, and it's like Hollywood is an instrument that says, we love your book, it's brilliant, it's great, people love it, we'll fix it. James M. Cain, the thriller writer of the 30s and 40s, was once asked how he felt about what the movies did to his books. And he pointed to his shelf and he says, my books are right there. They haven't nobody's done anything to them. Writers learn to take the money and run. You have to be J.K. Rowling to get any input on your picture, and it's still not going to come out like you imagined it.
Do you have a favorite author or a favorite book?
asking a bookie, let alone a writer, to narrow their favorites down to one is like giving them Chinese water torture. Barbara Hambly is an American writer. She started doing fantasy with strong female-male pairs. My favorite book of hers, well, of fantasy, is The Ladies of Mandragin. She's now a writer of mysteries and historical novels. And as Barbara Hamilton, she's written 3 mystery books with Abigail Adams, the first lady of John Adams, as the detective hero in the time in Boston during the British occupation, and I love that book. Robin McKinley's, oh gosh, it's such torture. Robin McKinley's Beauty or Deerskin, although I can't stand the parts where her father hurts her, but it has to happen so she can become Deerskin. John le Carré, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, which helped me write Trickster's Choice and Trickster's Queen. My brain goes blank.
Okay. How does it feel to have fans in other countries?
Wonderful. And they're just as cool as my American fans, but I knew they would be. I have very cool fans.
It's the first time you're visiting Denmark. Have you liked your stay?
Oh yes. Oh yes, everybody's been wonderful. And the food is great, and I only regret that we can't see more. I keep getting tired and not being able to hike around and see the things I'd like to see.
How did you like your visit to the Fantasyfestival in Esbjerg?
It was a great visit. Like I say, everybody was wonderful. The fans were great, and the staff is wonderful. I'd do it again if I could.